I, who saw people dying every day, was shocked by the indescribable hatred of the Nazis toward the prisoners who had become living skeletons. I had read about the treatment of Jews by the Nazis in various pamphlets, but there was nothing about how the Nazis treated women, children, and elderly men. It was at Auschwitz that I discovered the fate of the Jews. On January 27, 1945, the Auschwitz concentration camp, a Nazi concentration and extermination camp in occupied Poland, where over 1 million people were murdered as part of the Nazis' final solution to the Jewish question, was liberated by the Soviet Red Army during the Vistula-Oder offensive. In the camp's final days, the SS commanding officers evacuated 56,000 prisoners, most of them Jews. Leaving Auschwitz, however, did not mark the end of their ordeal. Instead, the SS ordered their soldiers to form columns and forced the prisoners to march during the brutal winter. Initially, the prisoners marched on foot, monitored by guards who shot anyone who lagged behind or attempted to fall back. Malnourished and improperly clothed, the marchers were subjected to random massacres. Eventually, they were transported back to Germany in open rail cars. Up to 15,000 of the former camp inmates died during the death march. Back at Auschwitz, where, according to some estimates, 9,000 prisoners remained, only a few SS guards continued to keep watch. Most prisoners were too ill to move. There was no food, no water, no medical care. All personnel had left. The prisoners were left behind to die. One of the SS's final acts was to set fire to enormous piles of camp documents in a last-ditch effort to conceal the evidence. They understood the enormity of the crimes they had committed. And at some point in the distance, we noticed the silhouettes of men dressed in white walking toward the camp. We weren't sure who these men were, and even feared they might be Germans who wanted to eliminate us. Suddenly there were shouts of, "Hello, comrades!" The Soviet soldiers told us not to be afraid, because the Germans had disappeared. Between 1940 and 1945, about 1.3 million people were deported to Auschwitz by Nazi Germany. 1.1 million were murdered. In August 1944, there were over 135,000 prisoners throughout the entire camp complex. By January 1945, after the Red Army launched the Vistula-Oder offensive and approached the camp, nearly 60,000 prisoners were forced to depart on a death march westward. The prisoners were taken mainly to Loslau, but also to Gleiwitz, where they were forced to board Holocaust trains and transported to concentration camps in Germany. However, the liberation of the camp was not a specific objective of the Red Army and occurred as a consequence of its westward advance through Poland. The Red Army had already liberated concentration camps in the Baltic region in early and mid-1944, and other camps continued to be liberated until Germany's surrender and the end of World War II in Europe in May 1945. A surreal silence fell over Auschwitz at the end of January, a period filled with confusion and suffering. Then, Soviet scouts stumbled upon Auschwitz-Birkenau. The liberators did not intend to go towards the camp, although Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin had heard of its existence through intelligence communications and discussions with other Allied leaders. The commanders of the Red Army had no idea it existed. It had no economic value from a military standpoint. Red Army soldiers of the 322nd Rifle Division arrived at Auschwitz on January 27, 1945, at 3 p.m. 231. Red Army soldiers died in the fighting around the concentration camps of Monowitz, Birkenau, and Auschwitz I. Around 7,000 prisoners were left behind, most of whom were severely ill due to the effects of their imprisonment. Most of those who remained were middle-aged adults or children under the age of 15. The Red Army soldiers also found 600 corpses, 370,000 men's suits, 837,000 items of women's clothing, and 7 tons of human hair. At the Monowitz camp, there were about 800 survivors, and that camp was also liberated on January 27th by the Soviet 60th Army, part of the First Ukrainian Front. The Russian soldiers, who were battle-hardened and used to seeing death in combat, were shocked by the treatment of prisoners at Auschwitz. In some articles in Soviet newspapers, such as Pravda, following Soviet propaganda, the writers did not mention the Jews in their coverage of the liberation. At that moment in Auschwitz, most of the detainees were Jews, but there were also Poles, Belarusians, and Russians, Poles who were from nearby towns, and still had the strength to walk returned to their homes. Some fled due to fear of a German return. Residents of Auschwitz and nearby areas crossed the camp's barriers to witness firsthand what was happening inside and to assist the prisoners. They dedicated themselves especially to the Jewish, Polish, and Belarusian children, more than 500 of whom were in Auschwitz, including about 60 who had been born in the camp. Some of these children were adopted by local people, while others were reunited with their original families. 2 Soviet field hospitals arrived at Auschwitz and, with the aid of the Polish Red Cross, provided care to around 4,500 sick former prisoners from more than 20 countries. These people were suffering from tuberculosis, starvation-induced diarrhea, and other illnesses, facing an extreme shortage of food. The adults weighed, on average, between 30 and 35 kilograms. Even in May 1945, a former detainee born in 1914, measuring 160 centimeters in height, weighed 25 kilograms, and another, 155 centimeters tall, weighed 1 kilogram. Starting on January 28th, Soviet and Polish filmmakers recorded on film the German crimes committed in the camp after its liberation. The encounter between the prisoners, saved from certain death, and their liberators is inexpressible in human words. Soviet officers and soldiers in rags, exhausted, facing glacial cold, yet triumphant, wept like children when confronted with piles of corpses in front of the barracks, and people agonizing, transformed into skeletons and stacked on bunks. The female prisoners screamed, sobbed, and lovingly touched the clothing of their liberators, realizing that these people were real, and kissed their hands. It may seem pitiful to say, but it is not so impactful for a soldier during an offensive to come across dead bodies. After all, he has seen many of them. However, here it was different. These people did not die in the heat of battle. That was clear. A pile of skeletal corpses leaning against the wall of the barrack. Snow had already covered them, and farther on, a group of those who had been executed. Men, women, children behind the fences. That sight had a profound impact on me and my soldiers. A crowd of children, from little ones of 2 or 3 years to teenagers, thin, ragged, sick, starving. We shared everything we had in our backpacks with them. The children presented a shocking image. Prematurely debilitated bodies, aged with sunken eyes. Even so, these children shouted and played. The workers of the Polish Red Cross, doctors, nurses, and volunteer paramedics who just months before had participated in the Warsaw Uprising, also helped in the recovery. When they began their work, they saw body parts scattered around makeshift cremation pits used after the SS demolished the Auschwitz-Birkenau crematoria. Human excrement and ashes were everywhere. Survivors suffered from malnutrition, bed sores, frostbite ulcers, gangrene, typhus, tuberculosis, and other diseases. And although the SS had tried to destroy all evidence of mass murder, they had left behind enormous warehouses full of shoes, plates, suitcases, and human hair. It was chaos. Once settled, the Red Cross personnel and local volunteers responded as best they could to the survivors' needs, navigating a cacophony of different languages. They diagnosed patients, provided them with identification documents and clothing, and sent over 7,000 letters to help patients locate family members and friends around the world. Some of the sick did not realize they were now free people. At least 500 of the 4,500 patients died, many due to refeeding syndrome or the lack of sanitary facilities. Auschwitz had been liberated, but the war still raged on, shaping the vast complex of the facility. The camp remained a prison, this time for thousands of German prisoners of war whom the Soviets forced to perform labor that echoed the work of Auschwitz's original inmates. Alongside some Poles who had declared German ethnicity during the war, the German POWs maintained the site, destroyed barracks, and dismantled the nearby IG Farben synthetic rubber factory, where tens of thousands of prisoners had been forced to work as slave laborers. Commemoration. The anniversary of the liberation date is recognized by the United Nations and the European Union as International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Efforts to create a museum at the Auschwitz camp began in 1946. The museum officially opened on June 14, 1947. Help us keep this project alive here on YouTube by subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching. God bless you all, and see you soon.